Full story. The Alpha's first love came back. So I returned his ring, walked away, and chose myself. The Alpha's first love came back. So I returned his ring, walked away, and chose myself. A true life story. Third-person narrative. She was not the kind of woman who fell apart in public. She had learned that early. Learned it the way you learn not to touch a hot stove, from one specific burning that you never fully described to anyone. So when the thing started to go wrong, she did what she always did. She kept her voice even. She folded her hands in her lap. She made coffee in the morning and drank it standing at the kitchen window, watching the neighbor's cat walk along the top of the back wall like it owned the whole street. She was very, very good at being fine. Her name, she never liked it, thought it sounded like something a relative had named her, without asking what kind of person she would grow into. Her name was Nadia. Not the European kind, the Pakistani kind, the kind that came with a whole set of expectations attached, like those price tags that leave a sticky residue even after you peel them off. She was 31. She worked in a school administration office, the kind of job where you know everyone's child's name and no one knows yours. She made a good cup of tea. She read before bed. She had a savings account that she added to every month, with the quiet discipline of someone who had once had nothing and did not intend to be there again. She had been with Rayhan for 2 years, 4 months, and some days. Not that she was counting. She just had a good memory for dates, the way some people have a good memory for faces. It was not sentiment, it was just how her brain was wired. Events filed themselves with timestamps, like photographs that printed the date in the corner, in small orange numbers. First time he called. First time he stayed. First time she met his mother, who looked her up and down with the specific neutrality of a woman deciding something she would not say out loud for 6 more months. Rayhan was, and she had trouble even now finding the right word that did not sound like she was either mourning him or dismissing him. Rayhan was the kind of man people noticed. Not because he was loud, not because he demanded attention, but because he walked into a room like the room was already his and everyone else was just visiting. He had this energy, this low-frequency hum of confidence that made men straighten their backs a little and made women, well, made women do the sorts of things they would not tell their friends about. He was not cruel. That was important to say. He was not a bad man. He was just a man who had never once in his life questioned whether he deserved the thing he was reaching for. People called him an alpha. She had always found that word faintly ridiculous, like calling a thunderstorm aggressive. What it meant, in practice, was that he led, he decided, he fixed things, not by asking what you needed, but by assessing the situation, determining what he thought the solution was, and implementing it before you had finished explaining the problem. Sometimes he was right. Sometimes you were left holding a version of your life that had been solved in a way that did not quite fit, the way a shoe that is almost your size will still eventually give you a blister. She had loved him. That was real. It was not a fairy tale kind of love. She was too old for that, and too tired, and had too many opinions about things to fall into the kind of love that required you to stop noticing things. It was more like a slow integration. Like how your eyes adjust to a new light source after a while, and stop noticing that it is there. He was just there. He was part of the rhythm of her days. She rearranged herself around him the way water rearranges itself around a stone, and called it fitting together. The ring came at the end of year 1. He had not proposed in the way that proposals happen in films, with bent knees and orchestras of synchronized feelings. He had placed a small box on the kitchen table one Sunday morning while she was making eggs and said simply, "I want this to be real." She had looked at the box, then at him, then at the eggs, which were going to burn if she did not turn the heat down. She turned the heat down. Then she opened the box. It was a good ring, not flashy, something with restraint, a small cluster of stones that caught the light in a way that felt deliberate rather than dramatic. She had put it on. It fit. She had not said yes so much as she had said nothing, and the nothing had been taken as a yes, and by the time the eggs were plated they were engaged. She thought about that later, the way the answer had happened in the space between words. She was not sure, even now, whether that bothered her. They had been engaged for 14 months when the woman came back. Her name was Zara. Nadia learned this not from Rayhan but from a message that appeared on his phone screen one afternoon while his phone was face up on the kitchen counter, which was where he always left it, because Rayhan was not a man who hid things. He did not hide things because he did not believe he had done anything that required hiding. That was the specific texture of what happened, which Nadia would only understand later, after she had had enough distance to look at the whole shape of it. She saw the name. She saw one line of the message. She looked away. Then she looked back. 3 words. That was all. 3 words that carried the whole weight of a history Nadia had known existed, but had never fully believed was still alive. Because the thing about a man's past, the real thing, the part no one tells you, is that it does not become past just because time has passed. Sometimes it just waits in a room somewhere, patient as furniture. She did not confront him that day, or the next. This was not weakness. This was the particular skill of a woman who had spent years making sure her responses were proportional, who had trained herself out of reaction and into something more deliberate. She sat with the information the way you sit with a diagnosis, turning it over, testing its edges, asking herself what she actually knew versus what she was afraid of. What she knew, the name. 3 words. His silence at dinner that week, which was a different kind of silence than his usual silence. Not the comfortable kind, but the loaded kind. The kind that had things living inside it. What she was afraid of, everything else. She cleaned the bathroom that week. Both bathrooms. Reorganized the spice drawer. Went through her wardrobe and removed 11 items that no longer fit the way she wanted them to, placing them in a bag for donation with the calm efficiency of someone who could not control the large things and had decided, therefore, to control the small ones. The wardrobe smelled different after. Better. More like herself. On the 5th day she asked him. She waited until he was sitting down. This was deliberate, not dramatic. She just knew that important conversations go differently when both people are at the same level. And she said, "Zara is back in the city." It was not a question. She had not phrased it as one. She was watching his face the way you watch the sky when you are trying to decide about weather. Something moved, fast, like a small animal crossing a road, there and gone before you could name what it was. Then the stillness came back, the familiar composed stillness of a man who had spent his whole life being certain, and he said, she reached out, "Old friends, old friends." She let the words sit in the air between them, did not challenge them, did not agree with them, just let them be there, in all their incompleteness. "Okay," she said, and went to make tea. She understood something in that moment, though she could not have articulated it then. She understood that he was not lying. That was the complicated part. He was telling her a version of the truth that was technically accurate and emotionally hollow, and he believed in it the way only someone who has not examined it closely can believe in something. He was a man of certainty. He was certain this was nothing. He was certain he had everything under control. He was certain he had chosen Nadia, had placed that ring on the table, had said the words, had meant them, and therefore the certainty of that choice should be enough. What he did not understand, what he could not understand, because some things can only be understood from one side, was that a choice is not a wall. You have to keep making it. Every day, every time. A ring on a table does not make the choice once and then rest. And some men, the ones who have always had what they wanted simply by deciding they wanted it, do not know this yet. The weeks that followed had a specific quality that she would later describe, to no one, as like breathing through a cloth. Everything was there. The oxygen was there. But it came with resistance. She went to work. She came home, she sat across from him at dinner, and they talked about ordinary things. The water bill, a film they were considering watching, his sister's new job, the neighbor's cat, which had now taken to sitting on their windowsill and staring through the glass with the specific conviction that it was owed something. She fed the cat when Rayhan was not looking. It seemed like the right thing to do. She was not spying on him. This is important. She was not going through his phone, or tracking his location, or asking his friends what they knew. She was doing something more refined and more exhausting. She was watching the quality of his attention. And what she noticed, over those weeks, was that it had shifted. Not gone. Not redirected entirely, the way it would have been if he were a cruder man engaged in something cruder. It was more like there was a frequency he had gone slightly out of tune on. A note that had been clear was now a little uncertain. She could not have proven this in a court. She just knew the specific sound of a man fully present, because she had known it with him before, and this was not quite that anymore. She thought about whether she was imagining it. She gave that thought real time and serious consideration, the way a fair person does. She turned it over like a coin, looked at both sides. She was not the kind of woman who manufactured dramas to feel interesting. She had no interest in being the victim of a story she had invented. So she sat with the possibility that she was wrong, genuinely sat with it, for 2 weeks, and at the end of those 2 weeks she concluded, quietly, the way you conclude things when you are just being honest with yourself, that she was not wrong. Something had come back into his life, and it had not left. She had a friend called Hina, who was the kind of woman who said what she thought in the same breath as thinking it, without the buffer of social calculation that most people applied. Nadia had always both relied on this and found it mildly alarming. Hina was the friend you called when you needed the truth. You did not call Hina when you needed someone to tell you that you looked fine. You called Hina when you needed to know whether you needed a coat. She called Hina on a Tuesday evening, walking around the block, because she had found that difficult conversations were easier when she was moving. She told Hina the outline, the name, the 3 words, the shifted attention. The weeks of ordinary conversations that felt like conversations happening slightly above the real conversation, the way you can see the frame of a painting and not see what is actually painted on it. Hina was quiet for 4 seconds, which from Hina was practically a meditation retreat. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" Not "what do you think happened?" Not "have you talked to him?" Not "you should." She asked what Nadia wanted to do. And that question, the directness of it, the trust embedded in it, the assumption that Nadia's wanting was the relevant fact, cracked something open in her chest that she had been keeping sealed very carefully for several weeks. "I don't know yet," she said. "Then sit with it," Hina said. "You'll know." She walked another 2 laps around the block. The evening was that specific warm gray that happens in summer, just before dark, when the light has not decided yet whether it is leaving. She watched a man park his car badly and get out without fixing it. She watched 2 children on bicycles almost collide and then laugh at each other. She watched the ordinary proceed in all its ordinary directions and felt, for the first time in weeks, something that was not quite peace, but was at least the shape of clarity beginning to form. The moment she knew, truly knew, in the way that removes all the comfort of maybe, happened on an ordinary Wednesday. She had come home from work 30 minutes earlier than usual because a meeting had been canceled, and she had not told him because it had not occurred to her that she needed to. She opened the front door. She heard him in the other room. His voice had that particular warmth in it, not the warmth of the news, not the warmth of something funny on his phone, the warmth of talking to someone who mattered to him in a way that was different from the way other people mattered. She stood in the hallway for a moment. She did not hear what he said. She did not need to. She heard the voice. That was enough. She had known that voice her whole time with him, had been on the receiving end of it for 2 years and 4 months and some days, and what she heard in those few seconds from the hallway was not that voice aimed at her. She went back to the kitchen, put the kettle on, listened to it boil. He came through a few minutes later and found her there and said, with the pleasant surprise of a man who had not planned for this, "You're home early." And she looked at him over the rim of her mug and said, "Meeting got canceled." And he said, "Nice," and went to change his shoes. She drank her tea. She felt the thing that had been forming over weeks finish forming. It arrived not like a storm, but like the moment after rain, when the air is different. The same air, the same street, but something has shifted in it that you cannot unnotice. She held her mug and understood that she was not angry. She understood that she was not heartbroken, not yet. Heartbreak would come later, would do its particular work in its own time, but what she was right now, in this kitchen, with the kettle cooling and the cat on the windowsill, was done. Not done with him out of cruelty, done the way you are done with a thing when you have looked at it completely and understood what it is. She was done. She did not act immediately. A woman who acts immediately on the worst day of feeling something is almost always a woman who has to undo something later. She had watched this happen to enough people, the dramatic exit that turns into the embarrassing return, the scorched earth speech that burns down something you needed, to know that the feelings and the decision were not the same thing and did not have to happen at the same time. So she let herself feel the feelings. In private, in the bathroom with the door locked, for 20 minutes with the tap running so no one could hear. The specific cry of someone who is not grieving a surprise, who is grieving a thing they had seen coming and had, somewhere underneath all the hoping, already begun to grieve in small installments. Then she washed her face, dried it, looked at herself in the mirror. She looked, and this was not a vanity observation, it was simply what she noticed. She looked tired, not the tired of a bad night's sleep. The tired of someone who has been working very hard at a thing that was not working, using energy that she could not quite spare for longer than she should have. She thought, I cannot give myself back those months, but I can choose where the next ones go. She turned off the tap and went back to making dinner. She had one real conversation with him. She had decided she owed herself that, not for reconciliation, not in the hope that he would say the thing that made everything make sense, but because she had always believed that before you leave a room, you should at least look at the walls. She chose a Saturday morning, before the shape of the day could fill up with other things. She sat down across from him, the same table, the same chairs, the same light coming in from the east-facing window, and she said, without preamble, without the soft landing of a setup, I need you to tell me where things are with Zara. He put down his cup. What followed was not a confession. He was not built for confessions, built for certainty, for forward motion, not for sitting in the wreckage of something and naming each piece. What he gave her was a series of true and insufficient things. That he had not done what she was maybe thinking, that Zara was someone from before, that he had not gone looking for it, that he cared about Nadia, was committed to this, had meant everything he had said. She listened to all of it. She noticed what was not in it. There was no, I have no feelings for her. There was no, it is completely gone. These were not omissions he was aware of making. He was not cruel enough to lie deliberately. But a man who loves you the way you need to be loved will say those things without being asked, because the fear of you doubting it is real and present and motivating. A man who has not yet made up his own mind will not say them, because to say them would require a certainty he does not have. She nodded when he was done. Thank you for being honest, she said, and meant it. He looked slightly unnerved by this. He had prepared, somewhere in the place where people prepare for hard conversations, for something louder. She could see it, the slight recalibration happening behind his eyes as he tried to figure out what this quietness meant and whether it was a trap. It was not a trap. It was just what she had. She had run out of things to perform for him. She gave herself 3 more days after that. Not in indecision, the decision was made, but in the ordinary logistics of deciding how to do a thing properly. She had always found that the how matters. That you can do the right thing in a way that diminishes you, or you can do it in a way that you can live with. She wanted to be able to live with this. Not for him, for herself, for the version of herself that would have to wake up the morning after and go on. She thought about where to put things. She had moved some of her belongings in, not everything. She had been cautious enough, or wise enough, or scared enough, depending on the day you asked her, but enough. Books, a plant that had been with her since her first flat, that she had carried to 3 addresses and somehow not killed. A photograph of her parents from their wedding, which she kept on a shelf because it was the one image she had of her mother looking purely happy, unguarded, not yet knowing what the years would ask of her. She would take the plant, she would take the photograph, the books she could come back for. She thought about the ring. She thought about it for a long time, not because she was uncertain what to do with it, but because she wanted to understand what she felt about doing it. There are some gestures that you have to be clear about, inside yourself, before you make them, because once they are made, they become the story. And she had always been careful about the stories she chose to live inside. What she felt was not bitterness. Not yet. That would probably come later, at a specific 2 a.m., and then again in the cereal aisle of a supermarket about 4 months from now, and she accepted this as the tax on having loved something real. What she felt, about the ring specifically, was that it was not hers in the way things become yours when they are given with full presence. It had been placed on a table, before the eggs burned. The gesture had been real, she believed that, but it had been made by a man who was certain he knew what he wanted without having asked himself all the questions yet. She could not keep it, not because she was angry, because keeping it would require her to carry something that was not fully hers, and she was trying to travel lighter from now on. She chose a Tuesday, late afternoon. She knew his schedule with the accuracy of someone who has been living alongside another person's rhythms for 2 years and 4 months. She knew which hours were his, when he would be out, how long the window was. She was not hiding from the conversation. She had already had the conversation. She was just choosing not to have the scene, the crying, the explaining, the circular argument that goes nowhere because it is not really an argument about the facts. It is an argument about the loss, and those arguments cannot be won by either person and leave both of them with less than they came in with. She took the plant, the photograph, a mug that was hers. She could tell by the small chip on the handle that she had made herself, catching it on the corner of the cabinet one morning months ago. She took her coat from the hook by the door, which was where she had always hung it, and noticed that his coat was there too, slightly overlapping hers the way it always did, and she stood there for a moment just looking at that, the two coats slightly overlapping, before she moved her hand and got her own. She put the ring on the kitchen counter, not thrown, not left on the pillow like a film, not enclosed in an envelope with a letter she had drafted and revised for 3 nights because she kept making it too long or too cold or too explaining, just set down on the counter, on the side near the window, where the morning light would find it first and it would not be lost or overlooked. She looked at it there for a moment, the small cluster of stones that caught the light in a way that felt deliberate rather than dramatic. It still did that. It had not changed. She picked up her bag. She picked up the plant, holding it in the crook of her elbow. She picked up the photograph. She closed the front door behind her. She made it 3 blocks before she stopped walking. She stood on the pavement beside a wall that had a climbing plant growing up it, untrimmed, going in whatever direction it wanted, and she put the plant down on the ground and pressed her back against the wall and cried the cry that had been waiting since month 4. Not quietly either, the kind of cry that has been deferred too many times, the kind that does not care about public or private. A woman walking past slowed and then kept walking, which was the right decision. There is a kind of grief that does not need witnesses, it just needs out. It does not need comforting, it needs to finish. It finished. She was not sure how much time it took. Enough. The light had changed slightly. She picked up her plant. She kept walking.
Ha!
He called that evening, then twice the next day. Then a voice message that she played once and then did not play again, not because she was protecting herself from it, but because she had heard everything she needed to hear in the first listening. He said what she had known he would say, that she was the one he chose, that Zara was the past, that he had not realized, that he wanted her to come back so they could talk. She sat on the floor of her old bedroom at her aunt's house, where she had landed, temporarily, because Hina's flat was too small, and her dignity had required her not to call Hina first, and she listened to the voice message and felt the particular grief of being told the right things at the wrong time. Because he meant them. She could hear that he meant them, and that was the hard part that no one writes about. The times when the man is not lying, when he is genuinely choosing you in this moment, and the moment is still too late. A choice made after the consequence of not choosing is not the same as a choice made freely. That was the thing. He had seen the ring on the counter and understood, finally, what he stood to lose. And from that understanding had come a clarity that he had not had before the ring was on the counter. She did not fault him for it. People are often clearest about what they want when they are watching it leave. But she could not unsee the fact of it. He had been uncertain, had remained uncertain, until certainty cost him something, and she could not build a life on a foundation that required her to keep walking out the door so he could keep rediscovering that he wanted her there. She texted him back one line. She said, "I know you mean it. I think you need time to figure out what you actually mean. That is not something I can wait for." He called again. She let it ring out, not to punish him, because there was nothing left to say that the silence was not already saying more honestly. The first week was the worst in the way that first weeks are always the worst. Not because nothing is happening, but because you have removed something that was structuring your days, and the days do not know yet what to do with themselves. She woke up at the time she used to wake up to make breakfast for two, and lay in the bed at her aunt's house staring at the ceiling, which was a different ceiling in a different light, and had to actively remind herself that she had chosen this. That this specific disorientation was the price of the choice, and not an argument against it. She went to work. This was the saving grace. She had always been good at work, good at the small procedures of it, the emails answered, the files kept in order, the children's names remembered, the forms processed without fuss. She sank into it the way you sink into a bath when you have been cold for a long time. Not exciting, just warm, just reliable, just hers. She did not tell people at work. She told Hina. Eventually, called her on a Thursday, from the bathroom at work, the same way she had called her before but in reverse, not asking what to do but reporting what had been done. Hina said, "Good." Just that. And then, after a pause, "I mean it, good." And Nadia had to sit on the edge of the bathtub for a moment, because the word from someone who had known her long enough to mean it properly was almost more than she could hold. She did not eat properly for about 10 days. Not because she forgot. She knew how to take care of herself, had been doing it since before she could have been said to be fully adult, but because cooking is an act of intention, and for 10 days her intention could not reach that far. She ate cereal. She ate toast. She ate an alarming number of biscuits. She did not beat herself up about this. She gave herself the 10 days as a concession to being human, and then, on the 11th day, made herself proper food and sat down to eat it at a table, not standing over the sink, not in front of something on her phone, at a table, with a plate. She cried twice more that she counted, once in the shower, which is the classical location for such things. Once in the car on the way home from work, 3 weeks later, when a song came on the radio, a specific song, the kind of song that attaches itself to a period in your life like a burr and does not let go, and she had to pull over and sit with it for a few minutes before she could drive again. Both times she let it happen and then got on with things. She did not catalog the cries or assign them meaning. They were just the body processing. The body always knows and takes its time saying so. She heard, from a mutual acquaintance who reported it with the specific energy of someone who had been waiting to share it, that Rayhan and Zara had gotten together, that it had been real, after all, or real enough to become visible. She received this information the way you receive a piece of news that confirms something you already knew. Not a shock, more like a click, the last piece of a picture you had mostly assembled. She told the mutual acquaintance that she hoped they were happy, and meant it, not generously, not with the performance of grace, but genuinely, in the flat way you genuinely wish the weather to be good for an event you are not attending. It had nothing to do with her anymore. She had extracted herself from the equation, and the equation had found its own answer without her, which is what equations do. She did not feel what she had thought she would feel when she imagined this moment, back in those weeks of not knowing. She had imagined she would feel gutted, vindicated, something large and requiring management. What she actually felt was a mild and unremarkable finality. The way you feel when a window you have been meaning to close finally closes, and the draft stops. You notice the absence of the draft. Then you move on. The harder thing, harder than the loss of him, harder than the practical dismantling of the life they had been building, harder than the 2 a.m. when she found the receipt for a restaurant she had suggested, and he had agreed to take her to, and they had never gone. The harder thing was the question she had to sit with about herself, because she was not naive. She knew she had stayed longer than she should have after the first signal. She knew she had told herself the story of fine for months when the evidence was already pointing at something else. She had reorganized a spice drawer and cleaned 2 bathrooms and called it coping, and it had been coping. It had worked for a time, but underneath the coping she had known, and she had chosen not to know. She sat with that. Not harshly, She was past the age of performing self-punishment as a substitute for self-knowledge. But honestly, she asked herself, why did you stay in the maybe for so long? The answer came in pieces, over weeks, like a repair that happens in stages. Part of it was the ring, the weight of it, the way a commitment changes the stakes of uncertainty. Part of it was that she had rearranged herself so completely around him that she could not immediately see the shape of herself without him, and that invisibility was frightening in a way that the bad thing was not. The bad thing was a problem. The invisibility was something larger. She had made herself small in the particular way that competent women make themselves small, not through weakness but through skill. She had been so good at adapting, at adjusting, at reading what the room needed and providing it, that she had adapted herself right out of her own center. She had stopped having opinions about where to eat and started asking him. She had stopped mentioning the things she was interested in that he was not interested in, because they went nowhere, and she was tired of going nowhere, so she went somewhere else inside herself, somewhere smaller and quieter. And she had called this being easy to be with, and he had called it being easy to be with, and both of them had been wrong about what that actually meant. Being easy to be with is not the same as being less than yourself. She understood that now. She was writing it into the walls of herself in letters that she intended to keep. She moved out of her aunt's house after 6 weeks, found a flat, not the one she had before him. That life was not waiting for her like a coat she had left hanging, a new one, in a slightly different part of the city, with a south-facing window and a small kitchen that had exactly enough counter space and a bathroom with good pressure. She painted one wall a color she had liked for 3 years but had never used because the places she had lived before either were not hers to paint or were shared with someone whose opinion she had factored in more than her own. The color was a dark green, not dramatic, not a statement, just a color she liked, on a wall that was hers. She bought a new bookshelf and spent an entire Saturday afternoon putting it up, which required 3 attempts and 1 consultation of a video she found on her phone, and a cup of tea consumed at the midpoint while she sat on the floor and accepted that this was what Saturdays were going to look like for a while. Not glamorous, not the life that the life had been pointing toward, just hers, just Saturday, just a bookshelf that she would get right eventually. She got it right on the 3rd attempt. It held. She unpacked her books onto it over 2 evenings, organizing them in a system that made sense only to her, which was fine because they were her books and she was the one who would need to find things. She put the photograph of her parents on the shelf too, her mother, young and unguarded, not yet knowing what the years would ask. She stood back and looked at it. The shelf, the photograph, the one green wall, the plant on the windowsill, which had survived another address and was now doing something new with its leaves, reaching toward the south-facing light like it had understood something about orientation that it was putting into practice. She made tea. She drank it standing at the window, looking at the street below. Different street, different light. The neighbor's cat was not there. There was no neighbor's cat. There was a woman walking a very small dog with enormous determination, and 2 men arguing companionably about something she could not hear, and the general ordinary proceeding of a city that had no opinion about her whatsoever. She liked that. She did not date again for a long time, not because she was sworn off things, not because she was healing in the performed way that people sometimes perform healing, but because she genuinely did not feel like it, and she had made a private agreement with herself to take her own feelings at face value rather than trying to hurry them into something more convenient. She had spent enough time waiting for herself to feel something other than what she felt. She was not going to do it again in the other direction. She joined a class, ceramics, which she had always vaguely wanted to try, which was the kind of thing she had mentioned twice in passing, and then not pursued because it had seemed self-indulgent in the context of a shared life, where the evenings had other shapes. Now the evenings had her shape. She went on Thursdays. She was terrible at it for the first 2 months, in a way that was mortifying and strangely freeing. There is something useful about being bad at something. It relocates you. You cannot be performing competence and also be a beginner and also be truly present, and she had been performing competence for so long that the not performing was a small strange relief. She made a bowl on the 3rd month that did not collapse. It was lopsided. It would not hold liquid. She kept it on her bookshelf because she had made it with her own hands, and it had stayed together, and that felt, in ways she did not over-examine, like a relevant thing. She started cooking again, properly. For herself, which was the part she had to relearn. The permission to cook something elaborate for one person, to set a proper place at the table, to eat something that took 45 minutes to make because she wanted to eat it, and she was worth the 45 minutes. She had not realized how much she had been cooking to be easy. Easy lunches, easy dinners, things that could be adjusted and scaled and agreed upon. Now she made the things she wanted to eat, and discovered that she had opinions about food that she had been keeping quiet for 2 years, and the opinions were not outrageous, but they were hers, and having them again felt like finding something in a coat pocket that you had forgotten was there. Rayhan called, once more, about 4 months after the ring on the counter. Zara had been and apparently gone. This was the subtext, readable between the words he chose. He said he had been thinking. He said he understood now what he had not understood before. He said he missed her. He said it with the specific sincerity of a man who had learned something at real cost and was carrying it without entirely knowing what to do with it. She listened to the whole call. She did not cut him off or perform coldness or try to perform anything. She just listened. When he was done, she said, "I believe you." And she did. She believed he missed her. She believed he understood more than he had. She believed the loss had taught him something real, and she did not doubt the sincerity of what he was saying in this moment. "But," he said, because there was clearly a but. "But," she agreed, "the version of me you miss, the one who rearranged herself around you, she was not the whole of me. She was the version of me I made smaller so that being with you was manageable, and I cannot go back to being that. I am not angry about it. It is just not available anymore." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know you felt that way," he said. "No," she said. "I know you didn't." There was a pause that neither of them rushed to fill. The good kind of pause, the kind where both people are being honest inside the silence rather than calculating inside it. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," he said. She put the phone down and stood in her kitchen with the green wall and the south-facing window and the lopsided bowl on the shelf and the plant reaching toward the light, and she felt something she did not immediately have a word for. Not triumphant, not bereft, not the absence of feeling that sometimes pretends to be peace. Something more like level. Like the feeling when a surface that has been tilted for a long time is righted and things stop sliding. She made herself dinner. She sat down at the table to eat it. Months passed in the way months pass when you are rebuilding something. Not dramatically, not with a montage of small victories, but slowly, and with setbacks, and with the occasional morning when she woke up and felt the weight of the whole thing pressed down on her, and had to spend 20 minutes just talking herself into getting up. Those mornings happened. She did not pretend they did not. She wrote them in a notebook sometimes, not journaling in the aspirational sense, just noting them the way you note weather, as a record. Difficult morning. Got up anyway. Made it through. She noticed, over time, that the difficult mornings were becoming less frequent, and that when they came with less weight behind them, like a message that has been forwarded so many times it arrives, faded, the original emergency of it worn down to something manageable. She noticed that she was laughing more. Not performed laughter, the laughing you do in company when you are managing an impression of yourself, but the kind that comes from being genuinely surprised by something, from the part of you that has not had enough rest, and is therefore less defended and more available to the funny. She laughed at her own ceramics. She laughed at a documentary she watched alone on a Friday night, with the flat to herself, and a bowl of something she had made, and the specific pleasure of the remote control being entirely hers. She laughed at the plant, which had now done something structurally improbable with 2 of its branches that seemed to her to indicate a personality. She went on a trip alone. Nothing large. A 3-day weekend to a coastal town she had read about and mentioned once to Rayhan, who had said it looked nice, and then they had never gone, because there was always a reason, and then there was always another. She went alone. She stayed in a small guest house run by a woman who made very good bread and had opinions about the correct way to walk the cliff path, which she shared freely and without being asked. Nadia walked the cliff path 2 days in a row, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, when the light was different, and stood at the edge and looked at the water and thought nothing in particular. Just looked at the water for a while, the way you can only do when you are not managing anyone else's experience of the same view. She came back from that trip, and something had settled in her that she could not fully name, something about taking up space in the world on her own authority. She had been in a room, in a town, in a landscape, and she had occupied all of it without apology, and without asking whether it was all right, and without adjusting the amount of space she took up, based on whether someone next to her needed more. It was a small thing. It was not small. She got a promotion at work. Not a large one, a new title, a small increase, additional responsibility for a program she had been running informally for a year already, which meant the promotion was less a recognition of new capacity than an acknowledgement of existing capacity that had been going unacknowledged. She took it. She did not minimize it when people congratulated her. She said thank you in a voice that received the congratulation without deflecting it, which was something she had been practicing, the receiving of things, the letting things land instead of immediately redirecting them. Hina took her to dinner to celebrate. They went to a place that was more expensive than either of them usually chose, and they ate good food slowly, and Hina said at one point, over something involving pasta and a sauce that deserved more attention than the conversation was giving it, "You seem different." "Different how?" Nadia asked. Hina considered this. Hina took her time when she was being precise. "More like yourself," she said finally, like the volume got turned back up on something. Nadia thought about that, ate some pasta, let the sauce do its work. "That's probably about right," she said. The question she got asked, not often, but occasionally, by people who knew the rough outline of what had happened, was whether she regretted it. The 2 years, the ring, the months of not knowing, the investment of herself in something that had turned out to be the wrong place to invest it. She always took the question seriously. She did not wave it away with the easy answer, the one that sounds resolved and closes the topic. She actually thought about it each time someone asked, as if the question were still genuinely open, because she believed that a question deserves real contact and not a prepared response. And the honest answer, the one she arrived at each time after actually looking at it, was no. Not no because it had not hurt. Not no because it had been worth it in some tidy transactional way where the suffering purchased a lesson that she could account for. But no because regret requires a belief that you could have known sooner what you only came to know through going through, and she did not believe that. She believed she had arrived at what she knew at the speed that was available to her, given who she was and what she was capable of seeing at the time. She could not have been kinder to herself at the start if she had not become who she was by the end. The 2 years had taught her the shape of what she would not do again, the specific contour of the shrinking. She could feel it now when it tried to happen, feel the beginning of the adjustment, the small social accommodation that was actually a surrender, and she could catch it. Not always immediately. Sometimes she caught it 3 days later, looked back and thought, ah, there it was. But she caught it, and catching it was the beginning of not doing it. You cannot learn to recognize a thing without having encountered it. She had encountered it. She knew it now. That was not a waste. That was the most expensive education she had ever paid for, and it had given her something she was keeping. A year after the ring on the counter, she sat in her flat on a Sunday morning. The light came through the south-facing window in the way it did on clear days, unhurried, slant-edged, landing on things with the quality of paying attention. The plant had done something new again. She had stopped trying to anticipate it. She just checked it in the mornings to see what it had decided. She was reading. A book she had been meaning to read for 2 years and had not gotten to in those 2 years for the accumulation of small reasons that are not really reasons. She had gotten to it now. She was 60 pages in, and the book was doing the thing that good books do, which is make the inside of your head feel more furnished, more inhabited, like someone has come in and arranged things better. She had a cup of tea, the right amount of milk, which is a proportion that takes years to learn about yourself, and she had learned it. The lopsided bowl was on the shelf. The photograph of her mother, young and unguarded. The bookshelf that had taken 3 attempts and held. She thought, briefly and without dwelling, I am not where I thought I would be. She was not engaged. She was not in the flat they had been talking about, the one with the extra room they had been vague about what to do with. She was not in the life that the life had been pointing toward, and she was not certain what the life was pointing toward now, and she had developed, over the year, a greater tolerance for that uncertainty than she had thought herself capable of. The life was hers. That was the simple fact of it. The whole of it, without adjustment for another person's preferences or needs or the frequencies they had gone out of tune on. The whole undiluted life, with its difficult mornings and its good pasta and its ceramics class on Thursdays and its south-facing window and its plant with a personality, was hers. She ran it. She decided it. She woke up in the middle of it and it was still hers when she came back. She drank her tea. She read her book. Outside, the city went about its city business with no opinion about her whatsoever. She liked that. She liked that more than she could have expected to. She liked the anonymity of being a woman in a city with her own cup of tea, and her own window, and her own long, uninterrupted Sunday, not performing anything for anyone, not adjusting anything, not making herself easier to be with, at the cost of being harder to find. Just there. Just fully, plainly, occupying the whole of the space she was in. The plant caught the light. She turned a page. That was all. That was everything. That was what choosing yourself actually looks like, when you strip the phrase of its performance and put it on a real Sunday morning in a real life. Not a dramatic moment of triumph, not a speech, not a clean ending with a bow. Just a woman sitting in her own window with her own book and her own tea, taking up exactly as much space as she was always supposed to take up, and not 1 inch less.